supervisory expertise include corpus linguistics and the use of corpora for language learning, also known as data-driven language or data-driven learning. So thanks, Peter.
Thanks very much. Yep, I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides with you here, but it's a great pleasure and a great privilege to be presenting for you today for this English Australia EdTech SIG Symposium. And I'm going to touch on something that is very dear to my heart and something that I've been working on for almost the past decade, as language data is suddenly becoming sexy again in the era of generative AI, ChatGPT. So today I'm going to talk about data-driven learning, language corpora. This is something that you may have heard of before. I'm going to just give a kind of basic primer about what it is and how it works and how you as ELICOS professionals can get the most out of these amazing resources and what they can do for you as language teachers, language professionals. So I'm not going to switch on to presenter mode because I'll be switching back and forth between different websites and so on. So I'll just kind of keep things as they are. But of course, I'd just like to begin with a brief acknowledgement of country, in which I acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today, paying my respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, while recognizing their valuable contributions to Australian global society. So just that brief intro there that we had before about who I am. I'm currently senior lecturer and program coordinator of the MA in Applied Linguistics here at the University of Queensland within the School of Languages and Cultures. I've got many hats in the English for academic purposes space, applied linguistics, educational technology. I sit on the editorial boards of a number of top journals in the field and currently the associate editor of the Journal of English for Academic Purposes. Also got significant professional experience with major publishers like Cambridge University Press, producing materials for IELTS primarily. And yeah, that's a little bit about me and why you should care perhaps about anything that I have to say at all. So essentially, corpus linguistics outside of generative AI has been around now for a number of decades. And whether you're a researcher, whether you're a teacher or a language learner, there are so many applications of building, analyzing, comparing, and consulting language corpora for almost any kind of linguistic feature, aspect, learning target that you would care to think about. If there is data available, we can build a corpus and we can analyze it. If we're interested in grammar, if we're interested in register, if we're interested in semantics, we're interested in lexical bundles, you name it, I can build a corpus and you can help your students to find it. For those of you who aren't sure what corpora are, they're essentially large, and by large, I'm talking in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, sometimes billions of word collection of written, spoken, electronically produced texts. And what's important about a corpus is that it's not just text at random, but they are carefully selected and compiled for specific linguistic analysis and research purposes. And we use them for studying the patterns of language, thinking about how language varies across different domains and uses, and to explore specific linguistic phenomena. We can use general corpora, which are meant to represent language in general, and therefore are composed of text from many different kind of domains, or highly specialized corpora, which are built and constructed from very specific registers and collections so that we can get a better understanding about language in use within those particular domains. Some examples of corpora that you may be familiar with, if you have any experience in this field at all. For example, the British National Corpus is a widely used general corpus of everyday British spoken and written language production. There's the American version of COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English, International Corpus of Learner English, as there's lots of corpora out there on second language data, third language data that can be analyzed for a range of pedagogical purposes. Some commonly available, freely available corpus platforms. And I'm just copying and pasting links into the chat here. We've got the Sketch Engine platform, which gives you the ability to consult the British Academic Written English corpus for free. You can look up concordances and get word lists and keywords. There's the simplified version of this, which is the Sketch Engine for Language Learning platform, which is very popular amongst students at secondary and tertiary levels. And then that English, the American version there, the COCA Corpus platform, which again is very popular around the world. I realize that I think I'm sharing these links with the hosts and panelists. So if the hosts and panelists could help me redistribute those to the full audience, that would be great. So back into the presentation, how can we use corpora for education? Corpora have been widely used in education for a very long time, whether you know it or not. Chances are, if you've used any kind of recent dictionary, for example, if you've been involved in any standardized language tests, if you've been using any textbook series by major academic publishers over the last couple of years or so, chances are you will have been exposed to exercises, syllabi, assessments, materials that have had corpus linguistics involved, corpus analyses involved in their construction and makeup. But what we're seeing, particularly an increase in over the last decade or so, as availability of corpus resources and functionality of corpus tools has increased, is the direct use of corpora for teaching and learning, either by teachers like yourselves or by the learners themselves, whether individually or in a classroom setting. And this kind of direct use of language corpora is termed data-driven learning. How does it work? It's essentially the hands-on direct use of corpus linguistics in education, and I'll explain what those two terms mean in a moment, but it's essentially about combining corpora, corpus linguistic tools, and corpus linguistic search techniques with pedagogical applications. From a theoretical point of view, there are supposedly language learning benefits at the individual level. From a constructivist point of view, taking into account what we know about usage-based approaches to second language acquisition, whereby frequency and salience of linguistic input is incredibly important in its acquisition, and consulting language corpora can help us understand those frequency-based abstractions that underlie the patterns of language in use and make them more salient to learners. Within a classroom context, you also have numerous socio-cultural opportunities for language learning to occur, whether that's through the use of teacher scaffolded activities, peer-to-peer discussion around corpora and corpus findings and analyses, and looking at various different kinds of data, whether these are concordances, statistical information in the form of keywords or frequency lists, increasingly visual graphs and charts, and so on. And all of these different uses of data, language corpora, and corpus tools, there's been numerous studies over the past 2 decades of this kind of technique being used in the teaching of first and second languages, genre, register, disciplinary courses, you name it, there's been a number of studies on that. So looking here briefly, again, just kind of summarizing some of the things that I was talking about, using corpora, engaging in data-driven learning, consulting corporate concordance lines from corpora, getting students not just to think about language and think about the findings, but how can they take data, language data and statistical data that's generated by that language data, analyze that, synthesize that, query that, discuss that with their peers, engage in problem solving around language related issues and data related issues, and with teacher support and scaffolded inquiries, All of these different kind of higher order thinking skills that are tied in with both language learning and language acquisition, as well as, and as more research will show, better learning in general in terms of increased cognitive awareness about language in use, about how to handle and manipulate large data sets, how to work with language technology. All of these potential benefits are available to you. What most of you will have seen if you've ever consulted a kind of corpus application before will be concordance lines of the type that you can see here, where you'll type in a particular word for a query or an expression, in this case results, and then you'll be taken to some example sentences with some context to the left or the right, or in full sentence mode about that word and how it is used, presumably with also some information about the genre or register where that word is taken from. Increasingly, though, with more modern tools, we begin to see more statistical information, the ability to consult corpora for multi-word units or lexical chunks, so on, whatever you prefer to call them. The ability now to more visually compare different results by part of speech, for example, as you can see here with the death penalty example, looking for verbs, which with using corpora that have been tagged for part of speech. Or increasingly now with some of the latest software, lots of different visual ways into that information for teaching situations and for language learners for whom reading concordance lines may be considered difficult or problematic. So lots of different entryways into that data, lots of different kind of generalizations that you can draw from it for a variety of purposes. Now, I mentioned before the term direct DDL, and that's contrasted with indirect DDL. And as I mentioned, that's probably the kind of exposure to corpora that most of you will have had in the past, whether you've known it or not. For example, I was one of the main authors on this IELTS series a few years back, and a number of the activities and the sequencing of the syllabi and the target vocabulary and the target grammatical structures are all determined using corpus linguistics, corpus analyses. But the direct version of DDL is what you can see here in the picture. So that's your language learners in the classroom using corpora themselves to solve language-related tasks and to learn more about how language is used in general and specific domains. So a sample activity might be something like this, where you go to a corpus platform, and this one is Corpus Mate. This is a platform that I have developed myself, and I will share the link with you to that in a moment. You will then search for prepositions that occur maybe after some target words, for example, here, blame, attention, and delighted. And then you'll identify the different kind of lexico-grammatical constructions that appear around those targets. And then using various corpus functions to query those, to discuss them, to solve quizzes, puzzles, whatever it is. As a teacher, you've decided to set up those targets and getting your students to explore those words in context. That's what we mean by hands-on. But if you don't have access to the internet, if your students don't have access to computers in the classroom, as is often the case in some classroom situations, then the teacher can go ahead and extract the corpus data under their own initiative, maybe present that as a printed handout or something for their students to then go ahead, and they're still able to do that DDL without necessarily being involved in the complexities of using a corpus tool, or maybe they're lacking some internet access or access to devices within the classroom situation. So either way, you've got opportunities for meaningful data-driven learning to occur. Now, what are some training materials that might take you from an absolute beginner in corpus linguistics and data-driven learning to having some degree of competency in understanding what corpora are, conducting some of the basic corpus functions, understanding corpus output, understanding how corpora can help you with the acquisition of vocabulary and grammar, thinking about how corpora can help with disciplinary writing. A few years back, I produced a course on edX called Improving Writing Through Corpora. This was aimed at tertiary, undergraduate and graduate level students, second language users of English, but also for first language users, monolingual speakers as well, would also find it incredibly useful. And I'd like to invite as many of you as possible also to take a look, and you've got time, at having a look at some of these resources. It's completely free to sign up for and join. All you need is a LearnX or an edX account, and these are free. The course is free to join. Sign up for the course or register for the course using the URL that I provided, and then you've got access to the course materials, which will take you through a 5-module online course, which should take between 6 to 8 hours to complete everything. It provides an explanation about how corpora can be advantageous over the use of students' use of dictionaries, online dictionaries, or translation websites, and so on. Some of the limitations of those tools in terms of especially being able to hand queries over the single word length. So the translation websites, students' dictionaries generally do okay with single words, but they tend to fall over when you get to like the 3-word, 4-word construction level. And this is an area where corpora can come in pretty handily and overcome some of those issues. The second module will take you through the basic corpus functions, including understanding concordance lines, understanding frequency information, understanding collocation information, before we get on to vocabulary and grammar and disciplinary writing. So you can go ahead and complete those modules and then send an email across to our team here at UQ. You can receive a certificate of completion for completing that course. And to date, we've had, I think, over 3,000 students from around the world. The course is currently being used as an assessment item at this university and at the University of Sydney as well. And it's one of the premier resources for kind of basic training in this area. So do check out that course if you've got the time. But as a teacher, though, once I've mastered the basics of corpus consultation, how do I then start to implement this within my classroom practice? So for this, we need some ideas. The literature has pointed out a number of useful ways of going about it. We'll talk in the next few slides about pattern hunting and pattern refining and how to do that. And then the 4 I's, namely illustration, interaction, induction, and intervention. And again, I'll talk about those in other slides. But when embedded into a writing program, for example, the framework here by Quinn is fairly useful in helping you understand how you might use corpora in students' revision in response to feedback, for example. I've done quite a lot of research in this area in terms of what feedback is best for promoting data-driven learning and how students use corpora to make revisions in their writing on the basis of written corrective feedback with relatively little training overall. But having students use corpora as part of an overall suite of tools that they use to help understand issues with their writing, how to overcome and respond to teachers' written corrective feedback in that space has been done and is certainly a very productive area of teaching and research practice at the moment around the world. So what do we mean by pattern hunting? This involves searching for patterns in the corpus of authentic texts, whether this pattern is a single word, whether that's a collocation, fixed phrase, a kind of grammatical structure, or so on. What we're doing here is consulting the corpus to identify the most common and useful patterns in the target language so that these patterns can then be taught to students. So say, for example, you are a teacher of academic writing and you want to find constructs that appear with the verb make. And that's the example that I've given here. We might see then by consulting the corpus that the verb make is often used in collocation with the noun decision. For example, make a decision. Or you might consult the corpus with make a and then a wildcard. and then be given a list of the different nouns that will appear in that slot. Once we've determined that pattern, once we've hunted for it, we are then able to reveal that to students and teach that to students as a fixed phrase. And then once we've hunted the patterns, we can move on to pattern refining. Once the patterns have been identified, we then isolate those patterns, play with them, change the words within them, change the grammatical structures, use them in different kind of sentence patterns, use them in different registers and domains, and see the effect that that has. So first, finding that pattern and then refining the use of that pattern through structured practice, carefully designed and sequenced activities, peer-to-peer discussion, and so on. Similarly, the 4 I's, this is for more PPP, teacher-led classrooms where the teacher will present the examples to students, either from a corpus themselves using the software in the classroom, or printed examples from written or spoken text. The teachers then highlighting the target language in context, explaining to the students that this is, say, a valid multi-word construction in the target language. It's one that's important. It's one that we need to learn. Once the teacher has done that, then we get onto interaction. This is where students are then using that construction in a communicative activity that will allow them to use that construction in context. Then, in the next step, induction, students will analyze examples of the target language they've encountered in the previous steps. This is where the hands-on corpus use can really help bring this kind of activity to life, helping students identify patterns, find their own collocations or fixed phrases that occur with those vocabularies, identifying some of the grammatical structures that that target language appears in, and really helping to deepen that understanding of expressions and how they're used in context and how they're used across different domains and registers, depending on your teaching and learning goals. And then the teacher then can provide feedback and correction at the intervention stage on the student's performance in the previous steps, leading to a basically complete cycle from illustration, interaction, induction to intervention, which should lead to a rewarding, a fun, and a kind of technologically advanced and appropriate method of teaching vocabulary, grammar, academic language, phraseology, you name it, to your student. I mentioned before as well, there are lots of opportunities for using corpora in teachers' feedback, for example. One of the things that's quite useful is to maybe provide links to corpus queries for your students within comments that are given on students' written production. Maybe you can highlight some odd phrasing, for example, and replace that and get students to query the corpus to come up then with their own replacement based on their analysis of corpus data. As you can see here with the original version in the yellow highlight, and then you can see the pink one there, which is the student's corpus-assisted revision of that original issue. And there are lots of opportunities in this space, and this is something that we try to do with a lot of our academic writing students here at UQ. Now, we've got another great resource for you here in the form of a free ebook, which has a lot of different activities, pre-built, ready-made lesson plans at a number of different proficiency levels and language abilities. And it's called Using Language Data to Learn About Language, a Teacher's Guide to Classroom Corpus Use. And we came out with this book at the beginning of this year. And what the book contains are an introduction about how to use the guide. And then we have, I believe, 15 ready-made lessons that take your students through a target language feature. It includes a description of the target language, the plan, how the lesson will develop in terms of structured sequence, including the relevant amount of time that it's going to take, and then lists of hands-on and hands-off activities. So I'll just take you through one of these, for example, for maybe slightly this one here about surfing the internet and other computer collocations. So if we go in here to the lesson description, it explains a little bit about who the level is for, what the main goals are, some of the tools that are used, different formats that the lesson plans come in, and the target language function. So in this case, we're going to be exploring the lexical items address, firewall, keyboard, link, navigate, and surf through the use of the sketch engine for language learning tool. There are YouTube videos explaining the methods and procedures for corpus analysis for each individual lesson. These are embedded into the course book, some information about the author, and then we can get straight into the plan. There's a plan on a page which can be printed out and shared with anybody, including the main objectives, the specific objectives, the different materials and tools, information about the level and grade, and the context in which the lesson occurs. We then have information about how the lesson will develop from introduction, looking at the different kinds of interaction, whether that's teacher to learner, learner to learner, the time that's going to take, some of the non-corpus-based activities that are going to lead to those corpus-based activities. So it's not just the case that the whole lesson is just students using corpora, but it's how you meaningfully integrate that corpus-based activities within the context of a complete lesson plan that will involve warming students up to the target language, thinking about how they might use the data to analyze those lexical items, some kind of conclusion or reflection based on what was found, homework or assessment opportunities. And then students can complete the actual activities here within the textbook with instructions about how to do it. They can enter the data into the text boxes here. They can check whether their suggestions are appropriate or not. There's automated feedback built into these lessons that are available for all users of this resource. And then aside from the hands-on version of that, we also have the hands-off version as well for teachers who are working in classrooms where students don't have access to the internet or don't have access to devices. So that's something that I hope many of you find useful. And we've tried this with quite a few people, and we've got really good feedback from teachers and language learners about the lessons that have taken place in here. So one thing now, I guess now with the time that I have left to show you, is to introduce you to a new corpus tool that was developed by myself and the other person in the image is Dr. Vic Beiser, who's also worked on the Sketch Engine and Scale corpus platforms. And essentially this tool was built as a result of my experiences trying to do corpora data-driven learning in Australian secondary school education here in Queensland. I ran a 2-term long project for students involved in writing science reports, year 9 science, at a school here in Queensland, and based on their feedback and interview data and what tools they preferred and talking about their experiences, I managed to take all of that feedback and to develop a new online corpus tool that aims to be one of the simplest and most user-friendly tools available, that is readily accessible by any language learner or teacher, and that has enough functions to be a really useful tool for a lot of the things that I've been talking about so far in this talk. So I'll just very briefly provide an overview about the Corpus Mate platform on the next few slides and how it works. But for here, I might as well just switch over to the platform, and I'll also just drop the link here into the chat. I can't send the QR code to access the free ebook at this time, but I will maybe try to do that if you email me, and I've also copied the link into that as well. That was just something that came up in the chat. So here's the Corpus Mate platform. Basically, it's a very simple search interface, unlike a lot of the other kind of corpus interfaces that are out there. that are freely available to use. Basically, it's very Google-like. I'm going to search for the target word that I'm interested in here. And I've got some information here about the different kind of search options. And we've intentionally kept this small and simple so that users don't get overwhelmed with too many query options or possibilities. So for example, I'm just going to search for the term assess, because this is one that I just use all the time. And it's one that comes up a lot. And I have the option to search for that across the entire corpora. Or I can limit my searches across 20 different school subject or university subject areas, including history, technology, biology, physics, psychology, and so on. Or I might want to limit or filter the results to spoken data and or written data. I'm going to just click search here on the term assess. And you can see here a number of concordance lines with some important color information that I'll explain in a moment. Before we get into that, I'd just like to explain about what the corpus is and what it's been built from. So it's essentially taken from a range of publicly available corpora. And these corpora are selected to be representative of spoken and written domains across all of these different subject topic areas. There's collections of academic language taken from the British Academic Written English Corpus and the Elsevier Open Access Corpus of Scientific Research Articles. We also have data from the Simple English Wikipedia, which is written at a level that is designed to be more accessible for your average second language user of about intermediate proficiency level. A TED Talk corpus and BBC Teach corpus of spoken data, and the British National Corpus 2014 of spoken British English data. Importantly, for those of you working with younger or more sensitive learners, the entire data set was pre-analyzed, I guess, or pre-filtered using a Python profanity filter. So it's filtered out all of the bad language, references to sexual matters, drug use, and so on that might not be appropriate for you in your language learning context. For example, I do a lot of these sessions in Indonesia where there are more sensibilities about some of the content that students might have access to when querying corpora, which can be a real issue in some context. And you can see here the breakdown by topic about how that works in terms of the number of documents and the number of tokens, as well as the breakdown of written and spoken data. But despite differences in these token counts, the end results that you'll get when querying by these topic areas or registers are normalized so that you can easily and fairly compare the results from one topic domain to the other topic domain and so on. So that's just a little bit about the platform there. Now, in terms of the concordance results, something that you generally see in most corpus applications is just a very long list of things with lots of repetition. But what we've got here is that the most frequent four-word combination appears first in the list, followed by the second most frequent four-word combination, the third most frequent, and so on. And to prevent overload, these are hidden behind, they're kind of just with one result displayed here. But if we click the little down arrow here, that will then take you to all of those results that contain that first hit. And then these can be used for a variety of purposes. You then also got the ability to copy these results to clipboard. They can go straight into Microsoft Word or Excel at your choice. Reducing that arrow then brings that filter back, and then I could go and have a look at the second most popular and so on. Another really useful function is now I've got the ability to click this and to check the source of where it came from. I can get a citation from Google Scholar in some contexts where the corpus will allow me to do that. So I know exactly where that data came from. I've got translation options for the target word here. So I've set it to Chinese by default. I've got here the term assess. It's going to take you straight to that translation for that term. I've got the ability to switch to sentence mode in order to see full sentences that contain that query term. I've got the ability to expand the context by clicking here on the expand button. So if I want more sentences before or after that query term, I have the ability to do that up to 6 times. I then got the pattern finder function, which will then give me that, what I had there in the concordances, but give me that, that statistical information about which constructions are the most frequent in my data set. These are then clickable, which will then take me to the things that I'm looking for there. And then I also have the ability to compare different results, maybe by using a wildcard, for example, here. I can click on compare results and receive a visualization about which word is likely to fill that slot according to its percentage in the corpus and its raw frequency count. These are then clickable as well. And I can also have a quick look at the distribution by topic for any of these. This then gives me a visualization about which topic that word is more likely to appear in, as well as less likely to appear in, with words with the blue bar there, topics that this word is more likely to appear with, and topics with the red bar there generally not found within that particular data set, as well as a visualization there about written and spoken distribution. So do go ahead, check out that tool. It's freely available for all to use, and your feedback is welcome. Just before we finish, I just want to bring on the elephant in the room, in that, why have you bothered to spend all this money making a new corpus tool when we now have ChatGPT and generative AI? Are you mad? The answer is A, we made the tool before that came out, so we're a bit sad, obviously. But then we've been using generative AI for some time now here at school. And basically what generative AI does, it takes what we've been doing in corpus linguistics for decades and has basically put a massive steroid injection into it. So in terms of corpus linguistics, ordinarily we've been working with data sets, say in the millions or even the billions of words, but then generative AI and machine learning has allowed us to now scale up this data into the 45 terabyte trillion token word data set, and has also changed the way in which we query that data and get output on that data. However, for those of you who are still loath to use generative AI in your classroom practice or are not sure about whether you should be using that, advantages of corpus-based approaches to language teaching and learning includes knowing the data. You can know exactly where that data came from, and even in Corpus Mate, you can actually get that citation about where that did come from. So that's super useful. Also, we know that that data is produced by humans and not just produced by a machine. That leads to increased authenticity. And I can replicate the same corpus findings over and over again, whereas generative AI will give me different answers every single time, simply because that's how the software works. Plus, it's a much more active learning process. Generative AI, you type in the answer, it does all the work for you. But with Corpora, you have to analyze the data, you have to query it, you have to recycle it. There's much more intention on the part of the learner to succeed. However, there is still a case for bringing generative AI into what we do. I don't see it as a replacement for Corpora. I see it as a wonderful new opportunity. It's lowering the level of required technical knowledge for analyzing language data. The user experience in the form of the chatbot is just so much simpler to what we're used to working with, particularly good for differentiation of language and output. This is something corpus linguistics doesn't do that well, but generative AI does really well. And having that prior user input as the next input and the ease of translating findings into ready-made teaching materials within a few seconds is something that, by marrying what we're doing with Corpora and bringing generative AI into the conversation, this is something that is super useful. So final slide, I've got just a link here about a seminar series that you may find interesting. I'm just going to drop the link into that, although I've messed up and not done that properly. And there are 30 videos there on YouTube from various researchers, including myself, that will take you through the basics of what it is that we're doing. And you can go ahead and check out all of those. And there's also a YouTube channel for that as well. So go ahead and have a look. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening to my talk. I hope that it's been interesting, and I hope that to see as many of you using some of these resources as possible.